Welcome to another episode of the brand called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I am delighted to welcome an accomplished leadership and coaching expert from Minneapolis, Minnesota, USA, Mr. Philip Hilt. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Ashutosh. I'm glad to be here with you.
Thank you. Philip is the founder of the Philip Hilt Leadership Coaching. So, Philip, before we start talking about coaching and leadership, tell me a little bit about your own journey from rural Indiana to becoming a leadership advocate and guide.
Yeah, I would love to. I grew up in rural Indiana in the U.S. Indiana is very flat, and so there's a lot of farming, a lot of agriculture. So I grew up in a farming community, very small town, about 700 people, and so that's what surrounded me. You know, a lot of blue collar workers, a lot of farmers. My immediate family didn't actually do the farming, but we lived on a farm where extended family did the farming. So a lot of hands-on work, a lot of hard work
Mm,
outside. My dad was into working on cars, so a lot of working with his hands, and so that's kind of how I was raised up. And the people around me who I saw working in the bigger cities of Indiana, there was some industries, a lot of manufacturing for automobiles, and so that was kind of another area where a lot of people worked. And so when I got out of high school and I graduated, I didn't go straight into college. I started working. And so I started working in those blue collar industries and
mm,
working in automotive factories. And kind of that's how I got my start. And then um, eventually I had leaders that I worked for who were operations managers who saw something in me. And, not only was I doing well
mm.
in my roles, but I was also influencing others and I was, becoming a leader amongst my peers. And so although I didn't really see it in myself, I had people that worked above me that really saw this leadership skill in me and kind of motivated me and helped mentor and coach me to eventually become, a higher level leader and help others
Interesting.
achieve their own goals.
Oh, interesting. Thank you. And how did your early roles as a blue collar worker influence your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, it definitely had an influence. Being in the front line of the work
Mm,
definitely exposes you to what everyone in the organization goes through, down to, that lower level hourly
yeah.
person. And it really, as I moved up through the leadership chain and leadership roles, it really kept me humble. It
Mm,
made me really remember what it's like to work on the front line, and the decisions that are made higher up have a big impact on those
right.
at the lower levels. And so staying connected, listening, and really understanding what decisions impact people in what ways it
Mm,
became really something that was foundational to my leadership.
mm. And you refer to you have a term which is called the people focused leader. How do you define a people focused leader? What are some of the unique qualities?
Yeah, I think a couple qualities are definitely leading with empathy. Like I mentioned, with making decisions, understanding the impact, but also understanding what drives other people and, what impacts your decisions have on other people and how you can help empower people or you can do the opposite and, make them feel like they're off to the side and not being heard. So it's
Mm,
very, very impactful. I think the other thing is helping people, especially who want to advance and maybe into leadership or gain higher roles, is
mm,
helping individuals with their unique abilities,
right.
really helping them discover what they're good at, not necessarily what the company wants them to fall in line with, but like what that mix looks like, what their creativity guides them, or what they're really unique
Mm,
in their own experiences.
well said. And based on all the work that you've done with so many leaders, what, in your view, are some of the common obstacles mid-career leaders face, and how can they overcome some of these obstacles?
Yeah, I think there's multiple obstacles. I think we can probably take approach of two different aspects of, some internal obstacles and external. I think the internal part of, someone who's in their middle career who might have a really successful career already. They might have a lot of security, but a lot of folks in middle age, and I can attest to that, and as myself is, priorities start to shift, and what
Mm,
we value and what's motivating leaders often changes. And
mm,
so
mm.
what you valued and what motivated you when you're 20 years old is not going to be the
Yeah.
same as you 20 or 50 years old. And so I think that's the big part of kind of it has to be overcome and realize, it's okay to not be satisfied in the current role. It's okay to want more,
Yeah.
more influence or more money, and that's okay.
Mm,
And I think the other part, the external part, is it can be really challenging to forge your own path. And, it's common for a lot of leaders to, follow the corporate ladder and feel like they've done successful and they've done well,
mm,
but they're also feeling like they just followed a path that was laid for them, and
mm,
there's things that they want to try that are outside of that path that might be risky, but also would be regretful if they didn't.
well said. Well said. And my next question, Philip, is what does leading with purpose mean to you? And how can leaders discover their purpose?
Yes. I think leading with purpose is kind of a mix of identifying what you as a leader want to accomplish for yourself and your family, but also being able to empower others to achieve the same. Like they also have a purpose, they also
Right.
have goals. So I believe that is a big part of it is taking the time to step back. And like I mentioned, your values and motivators, these are things we should probably revisit multiple times,
Mm,
and kind of think about how those make us the leader we are and what's the long-term purpose and what's the
mm,
impact we're going to have and
mm,
the legacy we're going to leave behind. And I think that's
mm,
kind of the guiding light is like, what do you want to leave behind and be known for and kind of work backwards. It's like,
mm,
that's kind of the purpose.
mm. Well said. How do you, as a coach, help leaders overcome self-doubt or fear of failure?
Yeah, that's a good one. I think there's multiple um, approaches, and I think one thing is to be open for feedback. I think it's something that when I work with people, initially leaders who want to advance, they in their mind they're thinking they're going to learn these hard skills, these technical skills, but we have to step back at the very beginning and get a better understanding of where they're at. Mentally, and feedback is an amazing way to get that. So I walk people through 360-degree feedback. It's basically, assess themselves, but
Yeah.
then also get feedback from all the people around them in the organization,
Yeah.
that offers perspective.
Mm,
So how they're being perceived by others can be
yeah.
very eye-opening, and how they might think they're communicating or displaying their leadership in certain
Mm,
ways, but then that feedback shows them that actually they have a gap in this area. And
mm,
so that is a place to start, and it kind of gives the leader the answers. In a lot of places, a lot of cases, they might find out where they think they're leading with a growth mindset and empathy and listening, they might find out that they have these gaps, and there's
mm,
certain situations or certain individuals that's not actually being portrayed how they want. And so being open to that feedback, being open to understanding that they can grow and they can change,
mm,
but you first need to identify what those gaps are.
mm. Amazing. And what, in your view, is the role of storytelling when you're trying to motivate others as a leader? And if you have an
Yeah, story.
example, I'd love to, love to hear an example as well.
Yeah, yeah. Storytelling is very important. I think it's important. It's also important to remember that it's information.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is you can hear stories from others. You can think about your own story in the past, but not getting really completely connected with the outcome of the situation, but use it as
mm,
information, use it to grow. It is the big thing. But I use storytelling in, when I coach others, when I write and I share, because it helps leaders connect with other individuals who are going through the
mm,
same thing. I think it's the key and important thing is we kind of get lost in our heads sometimes, and we can focus on ourselves and
Mm,
thinking that there's this problem that we need to solve, or with this we need to develop and move forward and learn skills, but we're just not knowing how. But in reality, there's thousands of people that have done similar things.
mm,
And so in my experiences coaching others, I draw on my past experiences when I was a leader
right.
in the corporate world. And some of those experiences are things I did really well, but some are
Mm,
things that I didn't do well. I failed at. And so I think examples that are most impactful
mm,
are when you can connect with a leader, and you can connect with like their emotions, what they're feeling,
mm,
their their hesitancies, their fears, their perfectionism. I think that's the big one. And if you can
mm,
tell a story of a time that you were experiencing that same thing, and maybe share the mistake or the learning that you had, that's when it becomes more human and universal. And that's when leaders can really connect the dots and
mm,
say, this person has been in that situation before, and they can share their knowledge, and I can use that as
mm.
information
Yeah,
to make my own decisions.
well said. And what are some of the key traits that you believe separate good leaders from great ones?
Mm, yeah, that's a good question. I think leadership comes down to empowering others
Mm,
and leading others and developing other leaders who can, follow your path.
mm,
But that's not always easy. Definitely here in the US and in middle management, it can be really challenging
yeah.
to find that time or that space to dedicate to people that work for you.
Mm,
And, you know, I think being able to step back and put your people's needs ahead of you
mm,
is really important.
yeah.
And there's been studies done, and last year there's a study about leadership, and it showed among millennials 63% was feeling like their leadership skills and their abilities weren't being nourished, like
Mm,
they just weren't getting that support.
yeah.
And I think that is the hard part to shift into a great leader, is to say, I have a ton of pressure on me. I have metrics to meet and company goals, but at the
Mm,
same time, I'm responsible for helping the people that work for me develop their own skills so they can become great leaders as well.
mm. Well said. And how do you, as a coach, guide leaders to manage difficult conversations or conflicts?
Yeah, I think one of my best traits is being able to be a really active and empathetic listener.
Hmm.
And so being able to step back, and instead of thinking of things to say or responses or being right, just listening, I think that really unlocks a lot about an individual that you're communicating with. And actually actively identifying their emotions and where it's coming from
Mm,
is something that I try to pass on to the
mm,
people that I work with.
right.
And it's very common to be working with a leader who's frustrated maybe with an individual or a situation.
Mm,
And upon asking deeper questions, it's kind of it comes to the surface that they're not even familiar with this person's ideas,
mm,
or what's motivating them, or they're not really completely understanding the situation. If something's changing
mm,
that they're not fully understanding, then that brings up, fear and resentment. And then the reality of it is, if they spend less time, speaking and being defensive, and more time listening and really
mm,
understanding people's viewpoints, their emotions behind it, what's the root of really those tensions, or those disconnections with other people,
yeah.
that really opens people's eyes, and it helps them connect more. And like I said, it's very common to speak with a leader and asking a series of questions about, well, what does this person want to accomplish? What's your history with this person?
Yeah.
What's the real thing that they want to accomplish, and what's the real
Mm,
reason? And that series of questioning, but then also the listening part, really helps leaders to become better listeners themselves, and really focus on not so much themselves or maybe even the outcome of a specific situation, but focusing
mm,
on the other people and their wants and needs is really eye-opening for a lot of
Mm.
leaders.
Amazing, amazing. And what strategies would you recommend to deal with workplace resistance to new leadership styles?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as we go through our careers, whether we're leading others or being led, things are always changing,
Yeah.
and the workplace is changing for the better or for the worse, whoever who you are, and your viewpoints. But I think it goes back to that listening and that connecting piece.
Mm.
If you're a leader, the best way to build trust with the people on your team is going to be that active listening so you can better connect with them where they're at and really what their needs are.
Mm.
And for me, that goes back like what we talked about earlier is, being familiar with every level of the organization
Yeah.
and what the people's needs are at every level.
Mm.
And if they're not being heard, then it's hard to build trust,
Mm.
right? So um, I think if there's any resistance, it's the leader's job to identify that resistance, but then not to ignore it
Mm.
or keep pushing, the same stories or ideas that aren't working.
Yeah.
It's the leader's responsibility
Mm.
to ask better questions, I think, and being able to identify that resistance and not take it personally
Yeah.
is the key in that aspect. Is
Mm.
change is difficult for everyone. Everyone deals with it differently,
Yeah.
and when it comes to connecting with a leader, everyone wants to have that a good relationship.
Mm.
Everyone wants to learn and be supported and be successful in whatever they're doing. And sometimes that doesn't come across that way. Sometimes it comes across as resistance or conflict. And so in either situation, it's the leader who has to stand up and say there's this resistance, there's this tension, and it's
Mm.
my job to better understand it and make that bridge between their employees and their own leadership
Mm. Mm.
closer and be able to open those communication lines. And then
Mm.
hopefully leaders can do the same as they manage up and they're
Correct.
working under their leader is use those same tactics. If their leader is less likely to have those conversations and listen,
Mm.
it's your job as a leader to, no matter what level out in the organization, is to step up and be able to
Correct.
communicate and just name it and identify
Mm.
those resistance.
Well said. What role does mentorship play, Philip, in shaping future leaders? And how can leaders be effective mentors?
Yeah, I think this is key. I think if, for me personally, living in the US, thinking of, back of Industrial Revolution,
Mm.
yeah, and, an industrialized world and how, we kind of train our kids in school to follow the leader and fall in line and kind of follow the same path
Mm.
and kind of that fall into the workforce. And I think mentors have a responsibility to kind of break that mold and say, and like I mentioned earlier, be critical and aware of the individual's unique abilities. And just because someone is doing really well in a role and the organization wants them see them in a specific role that maybe might not align with the
Mm.
leaders, you know, what they want to accomplish in the future. And
Yeah.
and so I think mentors and coaches have a responsibility to help the individual
Mm.
really uncover not only what they've accomplished and what they're capable of, but what's their actual goals. Are they
Mm.
using their unique abilities in a way that builds that purpose, like we talked
Mm.
about earlier? So
Mm.
I think that's the role of mentors and coaches
Mm.
is to help individuals who might want to make a pivot in their career. They
Correct.
might want to make a big shift and create their own business or whatever it looks like. I think it's
Mm.
it's mentors and coaches' job to really empower others,
Mm.
um, to to take risk and to really live into their purpose so they can be
Mm.
fulfilled in their lives and at the same time be able to provide for their families and really be fulfilled.
Well said. Philip, I have time for two more questions. My next
Right.
question is, what practices or habits help leaders maintain a sense of purpose and fulfillment in their own roles?
Yeah, I think this is really important. I think I've learned in my own career as well, and as well as working with others that um, continual growth and evolving as a leader, as a person, is not a one-time thing. It's something that happens throughout your whole
Mm.
career and your life. And
Yeah.
so I mentioned reassessing values and motivators earlier, and that's
Mm.
something I really help leaders work through and remind them it's not just a one-time thing or once every 10 years. Like this is something to revisit. And if you're not in tune with your values and what's motivating you and how they connect with your happiness in your job and
Yeah.
fulfilling your goals, I think that really throws people off and can really misguide people, especially leaders who take on the responsibility of empowering and influencing others if they themselves are struggling in their own career path because they've kind of not following what they're actually valuing and they're
Mm.
following someone else's values. That can be detrimental not only to themselves but also the
Mm.
people they work with who
Mm.
could potentially be exposed to that environment of not leading into their own values and their purpose. And
Mm.
so I think that's the key is being able to be honest with yourself and revisit these values and motivators. And like I mentioned, what's motivated you 20 years ago is not going to be the same thing as it is now. Like those change. And being aware of that, being that part of that is part of the growth process, is something, is a practice that I think is really important as leaders advance and have more influence on others.
Well said. And my last question to you, what is your vision for the future of leadership, and how do you hope to contribute to this?
Yeah, I think about this a lot. And for me, thinking about my career and my experiences helping others, I think it's all about support and making more connections with leaders. I mentioned the studies done last year. Another statistics that came out of those studies on leadership is, 80% of companies acknowledge there's leadership gaps in their training and how they organize, but
Mm.
over half of them, they weren't investing in it and they didn't plan on investing on leadership
Right.
development. And so to me, that's a big signal that I think to years to come, that will change. I think companies will start investing more and they'll really understand they're developing their current leaders is really going to help support not only their business and their success, but also develop even stronger leaders.
Mm.
And so that's kind of my vision. And I think how myself can influence that now is being able to connect with as many leaders as
Yeah.
possible who maybe aren't getting the support they need and being
Mm.
able to be realistic about the situation and realistic that you might not be getting support from your leader or organization, but that doesn't mean there's not support available or you can't achieve, what you want to achieve.
Mm.
And so really being able to connect with those leaders and showing them that they don't have to quit their job or job hop or make drastic changes. If they have a good job that they're
Mm.
they're good at and successful and they like the people they work with, like getting support from mentor and coaches can only help them develop further and get ready for
Mm.
that next role where they can
Mm.
have even more influence and impact and really fulfill what they want to achieve.
Mm.
And so I think, like I said, as we move to the future, I think there's going to be this big push for leadership development in organizations that want to really grow and
Yeah.
and be the champions of empowering others and empowering the next generation.
Mm.
Um, but I think individual levels, any leader can be a mentor, can be a coach to so many people, and there's so many different ways to help those people. And
Mm.
so that's what I want to do, and especially those people who, maybe they didn't get support in their starting phases of their career. Maybe they didn't go to college right away. Maybe they didn't have the
Mm.
opportunities that other leaders have had to
Mm.
advance. To really be in touch with those people is something that excites me, and really
Mm.
to really show them that
Yeah.
not it's not necessarily necessary in some situations to get all that schooling or get
Correct.
certain certificates. Maybe it's that coach or mentor can make that huge huge impact to help them get to the next
Absolutely.
level.
And I'm sure you will.
It's yep. So that's really my main focus, and that's kind of my vision for the future.
Thank you. Thank you. And on that note, Philip, thank you so much for talking to me about your journey. It's so fascinating how you have evolved from a blue collar industry to a leadership coach. Obviously, you learned your lessons very, very well as you were moving along in life. We spoke about some of the common obstacles people face. We spoke about a people focused leader. You also give some very interesting thoughts on what separates good leaders and great leaders. You talked about motivation. You talked about storytelling. We also covered some interesting points on how to handle difficult conversations and conflicts. We spoke about mentorship, and finally, we spoke about the future of leadership. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.